Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today for our B2 level shadowing practice. I'm excited to guide you through an exercise that will help you feel more confident when talking about news and current events in English. Shadowing is a technique where you listen to spoken English and repeat it almost at the same time. This method helps improve your pronunciation, rhythm, and understanding of natural speech. By using real examples about things happening in the world, you will build both your listening and speaking skills, and you will learn to express your own ideas with clarity. In this chapter, we'll explore what shadowing really means and why it is such a powerful way to learn English. First, we'll look at how shadowing can train your ear to hear the sounds and intonation of native speakers. Then, we'll consider how repeating immediately after hearing a phrase helps your mouth remember new word combinations. Finally, we'll preview the topic of news and current events, and why those subjects give you a rich source of conversations to practice with. Shadowing works best when you focus on short sentences or brief paragraphs that reflect everyday language. That is why we'll use simple articles, interview clips, and informal chats about headlines. When you hear a speaker say, "Experts say the climate summit will bring new agreements," you will repeat each word and notice how the speaker's tone rises at the end of questions or falls at the end of statements. This close attention to tone and timing makes your own speech sound more natural over time. You will practice shadowing in small steps, listening, repeating, and then moving forward to the next phrase. Talking about news and current events offers two main benefits. First, you stay informed about what is happening around you, which makes your conversations more engaging and relevant. Second, news language often includes useful expressions for giving opinions, asking questions, and describing changes. Phrases like "according to the report," "many people believe that," or "how do you feel about this?" are exactly the kinds of sentences you need in real-life conversations, interviews, or presentations. Throughout this video, we'll highlight these phrases and repeat them in different ways so that you can shadow along naturally. By the end of this chapter, you will understand the purpose of our shadowing practice and feel ready to move into the main part of our lesson. In Chapter 2, we will explore key verbs and phrases for discussing news, show you how to form opinions and questions, and provide gentle repetition to reinforce your learning. Now that you know what shadowing is and why we use news topics, let's head into the main part and begin shadowing together. Building on our introduction to shadowing and news topics, let's explore the core language you need to discuss current events clearly and confidently. We will focus first on useful verbs and noun phrases that appear in news reports, then on expressions for sharing opinions, and finally on questions you can ask to deepen a conversation. As you read each sentence, try shadowing the exact words, noticing how your voice rises and falls in natural English. One group of verbs you'll hear often in news contexts includes report, announce, claim, and suggest. For example, you might hear, "The government announced a new health initiative yesterday," or "Experts suggest that exercise can improve mental health." Shadowing these phrases will help you master both the meaning and the pronunciation. Notice how announced has two syllables with stress on the second. Announced. When you repeat it, make sure to stress the same syllable. Later in our examples chapter, we'll use these verbs in short dialogues that you can shadow in real time. Next, let's look at noun phrases that frequently follow these verbs. Phrases such as a major breakthrough, an official statement, a detailed report, and important findings appear in many news stories. Listen and repeat. A major breakthrough in renewable energy was achieved last week, and then an official statement from the company outlined its plans. By shadowing these noun phrases, you will internalize how the words connect naturally. Notice how native speakers often link major and breakthrough smoothly. Major breakthrough. Practice linking those sounds as you shadow. After learning verbs and noun phrases, we move to opinion language. In spoken English, people often soften their opinions with phrases like, "in my view," "many people believe," "it seems that," and "I'm convinced that." For example, you might hear, "in my view, this policy will lead to long-term benefits," or "it seems that inflation is slowing down." Shadow these lines and then repeat in a slightly different way. "I believe this policy will bring benefits over time, and it looks like inflation is starting to ease." Repeating opinions in varied forms helps you feel ready to express your own ideas in real conversations. To join a discussion smoothly, you also need questions. Common question forms include, "What do you think about?" "How do you feel regarding?" and "Could you explain why?" For instance, "What do you think about the new environmental regulations?" and "Could you explain why the market reacted so strongly?" After you shadow, practice a small variation. "How do you feel about the new regulations?" or "Why do you believe the market reacted that way?" These small changes build your confidence to ask questions in real time. While shadowing, pay close attention to connectors, words that link ideas and keep conversations flowing. Connectors like however, therefore, meanwhile, and as a result guide listeners through your points. For example, "The economy grew significantly, however, unemployment rates remained high." Shadow that sentence, then repeat a variation. "The company's profits rose sharply, however, employee satisfaction stayed low." Notice how however is pronounced, however, with the stress on the second syllable. Practicing these connectors helps your speech feel cohesive. It's also important to shadow expressions of uncertainty or probability, such as "it's likely that," "there is a chance," and "experts warn that." For example, "It's likely that interest rates will increase next month," followed by "experts warn that delays could affect supply chains." Repeat those sentences and then say, "There is a chance interest rates could rise soon," and "experts caution that delays may impact supply." Shadowing these phrases will prepare you to discuss scientific reports or forecasts in your own words. As you shadow these different sentence types, reflect on how the tone changes. Statements typically end with a falling tone, while questions end with a rising tone. Opinions and uncertainty phrases may use a slightly hesitant or gentle tone. Mimicking these subtle differences will make your English sound more natural. When you hear "experts warn that delays could affect supply," notice the firm tone on "warn," and when you say it, bring slightly more emphasis to that word. Finally, combine these elements into longer stretches of speech. For example, try shadowing. "According to the latest report, the company announced a major breakthrough in battery technology. However, critics suggest that production costs may limit its impact." Then repeat, "The official statement said that the policy will improve infrastructure. Meanwhile, many citizens believe that implementation will take too long." By practicing these compound sentences, you learn how to connect ideas, use varied vocabulary, and maintain a smooth flow. Now that we have covered verbs and noun phrases, opinion expressions, questions, connectors, and uncertainty language, you are ready to see these elements in action. In the next chapter, we will present 2 short natural dialogues that incorporate all of these key phrases. You'll shadow each line, then repeat a variation to reinforce your learning. Let's move on to those examples and practice shadowing real conversations about the news and current events. Chapter 3. Examples. Building on the language we practiced in Chapter 2, let's try 2 short conversations that you can shadow in real time. In each example, you will hear a line about a current event, repeat it, and then shadow a slightly different version to reinforce the same idea. As you go through these dialogues, pay attention to the verbs, noun phrases, opinions, questions, connectors, and tone that we discussed. In the first example, Imagine two friends meeting in a cafe and talking about a recent climate summit. One friend begins by asking, "Did you read the article about the climate summit yesterday?" Now repeat after me. Did you read the article about the climate summit yesterday? Good. Now try another way to ask the same question. Have you seen the news report on the climate summit from yesterday? Notice how "have you seen" is also a question in the present perfect, and the climate summit from yesterday links back to the same event. To ask for more detail, the second friend says, "Could you explain how those targets would work?" Shadow that. Could you explain how those targets would work? Then try, "Can you tell me why those goals are expected to help?" See how "could you explain" becomes "can you tell me why?" and targets becomes goals. These small changes train you to ask questions in flexible ways. The conversation continues. According to the report, participating countries will commit to a 30% reduction in emissions by 2030. However, some critics say the plan lacks enforcement. First, shadow. According to the report, participating countries will commit to a 30% reduction in emissions by 2030. However, some critics say the plan lacks enforcement. Now repeat a variation. The official report states that governments aim for a 30% cut in emissions by 2030. Meanwhile, opponents argue it needs stronger rules. Notice how "according to the report" becomes "the official report states," and "however" becomes "meanwhile," while keeping the same structure. Finally, in this dialogue, the second friend asks, "What do you think about the likelihood of meeting those goals?" Shadow it. What do you think about the likelihood of meeting those goals? Then try a different form. How likely do you believe it is that they will reach these targets? Practice the rising intonation on goals and targets as you ask these questions. Now, let's move to a second example. A brief interview in a radio studio about a new public health initiative. The host begins, "Welcome to today's desk. In my view, this initiative could improve access to healthcare for many people." Even though we usually skip formal greetings in chapter scripts, imagine this as the first line in our dialogue. Shadow exactly. In my view, this initiative could improve access to healthcare for many people. Then repeat, "I believe this program will help more people get medical care." The guest responds, "Many people believe that community clinics will reduce wait times and costs." Shadow, "Many people believe that community clinics will reduce wait times and costs." Then vary it. "It seems that local health centers could cut delays and expenses." Notice how "many people believe" becomes "it seems that," and "community clinics" becomes "local health centers." The host asks, "How do you feel regarding the government's role in funding these clinics?" Shadow, "How do you feel regarding the government's role in funding these clinics?" Then try, "What is your opinion about the state's part in supporting these clinics?" Pay attention to "how do you feel regarding" versus "what is your opinion about," and "government's role" versus "state's part." A guest explains, "I'm convinced that public investment is essential. Otherwise, the clinics may not serve low-income communities." Shadow, "I'm convinced that public investment is essential. Otherwise, the clinics may not serve low-income communities." Then repeat, "I strongly believe that government funding is vital, or these centers won't reach disadvantaged areas." Note the stronger tone on "I'm convinced" and "I strongly believe," and how public investment parallels government funding. To close the segment, the host concludes, "Therefore, experts warn that without increased budgets, underserved areas will continue to face challenges." Shadow, "Therefore, experts warn that without increased budgets, underserved areas will continue to face challenges." Now say, "So specialists caution that if funding does not rise, these regions will keep struggling." Listen for the stress on warn and caution, and the connector therefore. versus so. As you shadow these two examples, notice how each line combines the language we explored in Chapter 2. Verbs like suggest and warn. Noun phrases like community clinics and public investment. Opinions softened by in my view and it seems. And questions that invite further explanation. By practicing both informal and interview-style dialogue, you prepare yourself for a wide range of real-life conversations. In the next chapter, we will review and summarize the key phrases and strategies you've learned, remind you how shadowing strengthens your skills, and finish with an encouraging message to practice every day. Let's move on to our conclusion in Chapter 4. The second friend replies, "Yes, I found it very informative and hopeful." Shadow that exact line. "Yes, I found it very informative and hopeful." Then say, "Yes, I thought it was both clear and encouraging." Pay attention to the adjectives informative and hopeful and how you can use clear and encouraging to express a similar feeling in different words. The first friend follows up with, "Experts suggest that new emissions targets could slow climate change." Shadow. Experts suggest that new emissions targets could slow climate change. Then repeat. Experts warn that stricter targets may reduce greenhouse gases. Notice how we changed suggest to warn and could slow to may reduce, giving you practice with uncertainty language and verbs from Chapter 2. Bringing together everything we've practiced, you now have a clear set of tools to discuss news and current events in English. We started by defining shadowing and understanding how listening and repeating helps you capture natural rhythm and intonation. Then we explored key verbs like announce, suggest, and warn, and learned how to use noun phrases such as a major breakthrough and public investment. We practiced sharing opinions with gentle phrases like in my view and it seems that, and we formed questions like what do you think about and could you explain why? Finally, we used connectors, however, therefore, meanwhile, and uncertainty expressions such as it's likely that and experts caution that to tie our sentences together smoothly. Thank you for joining me on this shadowing journey. You've learned practical language for talking about current events, and you've experienced how repetition and variation can solidify new vocabulary and structures. Keep shadowing these examples, and then move on to new texts that challenge you just enough. I encourage you to practice every day. The more you shadow, the more confident and fluent you will become. Happy practicing, and I'll see you in our next lesson. In our examples chapter, you shadowed two real-life dialogues, an informal chat about a climate summit and a brief interview on healthcare initiatives. You repeated each line exactly, and then varied the wording to build flexibility in your speech. By shadowing both informal and more formal styles, you practiced pronunciation, phrasing, and tone across different scenarios. Remember, shadowing is most effective when you practice regularly with short passages that interest you. Choose news articles, interviews, or podcasts on topics you care about, and shadow each sentence until it feels natural in your own voice. Pay attention to how native speakers stress certain words and link phrases together, and try to mimic their patterns of rising and falling intonation.